Good morning, students. How are you all? I hope you all are fine and doing very well. In today's English Mulberry class, we will study a humorous poem written by Eileen Fisher. The title of the poem is Little Talk. So, students, come let's start our class now. Before proceeding further, let me tell you something about the poet. The poet of this poem is Ellen Lucia Fisher. This is her full name. She was an American writer of more than 100 children's books, including poetry, picture books in verse, prose about nature and America, biographies, Bible themed books, plays, and articles for magazines and journals. She wrote more than 100 books for children, including poetry and plays. The Coffee Pot Face is one of her well known collections of poems about everyday things such as ladybugs, tummy aches, and icicles. She was born on September 9, 1906, in Iron River, Michigan. Iron River is a place which is in Michigan. She received her bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Michigan in 1927. She became director of the Women's National Journalist in 1928. She was an American writer of more than 100 books for children. She thought of herself primarily as a poet, and her poems are frequently used in textbooks. In 1978, she won the National Council of Teachers of English Award for Excellence in Poetry for Children. She died on December 2, 2002 in Boulder, Colorado. Now, here is a brief introduction about the poem. What the poem is about actually. The poem encourages us to imagine that beetles, bugs, and bees have conversations on various topics. This is a humorous poem about the insect world. In the poem, the poet imagines what kind of discussions insects have among themselves. Now, children, as we all are human beings, we communicate our thoughts and feelings with others by talking to them. While talking, we can express our feelings to other persons. Now, in this poem, the poet encourages us to imagine that beetles, bugs, and bees, these small creatures, they also have conversations on various topics like we human beings did or do. They also communicate among themselves on various topics. This is a humorous poem. Why? Because in this poem it's not written, but the poet assumes that the insects like beetles, bugs, and bees, they communicate on various topics like the climate where they live or what kind of work they do all throughout the day, etc. Now, this is a humorous poem about the insect world. The poet imagines what kind of discussions they have among themselves. So, this is why it is called a humorous poem. You will surely enjoy it. Children, now I am going to read the poem. Please listen carefully how I pronounce each word, and then I will explain the poem stanza wise. Poem Little Talk. Don't you think it's probable that beetles, bugs, and bees talk about a lot of things? You know, such things as these? The kind of weather where they live, in jungles tall with grass, and earthquakes in their villages whenever people pass. Of course, we will never know if bugs talk very much at all because our ears are far too big for talk that is so small. Now, coming to stanza 1, don't you think it's probable that beetles, bugs, and bees? Students, the word probable means it's quite certain, it's possible. Now, don't you think that it's possible, it's certain that like we human beings communicate with others, we talk with others to express our feelings, to share our thoughts, we talk, we communicate. Now, don't you think that it's possible that these small creatures like beetles, bugs, and bees talk about a lot of things, such things as these. Now, poet is going to tell like we human beings communicate with others, similarly, likely these small creatures, little creatures, they may also be conversing with each other on various topics. And the topics can be the kind of weather where they live, in jungles tall with grass, and earthquakes in their villages whenever people pass. Now, we are human beings, we may talk to other persons or we may converse on the topics like weather, where we live, the area, or we are having numerous topics to converse. Similarly, the poet is telling that these bugs, beetles, and bees, they might also be talking on the topic like weather, where they live, in jungles tall with grass, or earthquakes in their villages whenever people pass. This line means that the poet thinks that bugs feel an earthquake when people pass by their village because people are much bigger than bugs. We human beings are much bigger in size than these small creatures. Yes, we are. Now, if something bigger in size than us passes nearby us, then we also feel shaking and tremor around us. Similarly, when we huge creatures, for these tiny creatures, we huge human beings, when we walk along their villages where they live in jungles tall with grass or somewhere else, whenever we pass through their way, they also feel tremors or shaking like they we experience in earthquake. They also feel like earthquakes in their villages whenever people pass. Of course, we will never know if bugs talk very much at all because our ears are far too big for talk that is so small. Now, we will never know about the actual talk they communicate among themselves. The poet is just assuming, imagining the topics on which they might converse with each other. But in actual, we will never know if bugs talk very much at all. Why? Because we are much bigger in size than these small tiny creatures, and if they produce any kind of sound, we are unable to hear it easily. Why? Because our ears are far too big for talk that is so small. We are very big in size as compared to these tiny creatures. Now, if they produce any kind of sound or if they communicate in their own language among themselves, we will not be able to hear it because of our bigger size, and our ears are too big for their small talks. So, this was the poem about. Haven't you enjoyed it? Now, after explaining the poem, it's time for some homework. Your homework is to read the poem again and write it in your mulberry notebooks. If you are good at drawing, you can even draw the pictures given in your book along with the poem. And if you are unable to draw it, no matter, you can only write the poem in your notebook. And try to solve the exercises given in the book. Try to solve the exercises, and later we will discuss those exercises in next part of this poem. So, with this, our today's class is over. I hope you all have understood as well as enjoyed the poem. We will meet again soon in the next part of this poem, that is part 2, where we will be discussing the exercises of this poem. Till then, complete all your homework and stay safe. Thank you and have a nice day.